And Joyce Vance, former U.S. Attorney, professor at the University of Alabama School of Law and MSNBC contributor. We also have Naveed Jamali, Daily Beast columnist, author of How to Catch a Russian Spy, and also an MSNBC contributor. Let's start with you on this, Joyce. Was what happened in the Michael Cohen payments, some reporting, Avenatti saying up to $4 million or more, right? Or his association with the president. In that whole space here, what stands out to you, Joyce?
The most important thing to focus on, Richard, is that we don't have all of the facts that are necessary to form a judgment about whether Cohen's conduct was merely swampy or whether it was criminal. So we have to be aware of that and not too quick to rush to judgment. But because these situations tend to evolve and we learn more knowledge, it bears watching to see whether this provides either some sort of an inappropriate pay-to-play sort of a scheme where access to the president is the result of payment, or perhaps some connection to Russia, the collusion connection that's been the subject of the Mueller investigation.
When does it, Joyce, move from swampy into criminal or illegal? When would that happen, and what would you be looking for?
So it would happen in any number of different ways, because what the prosecution has to do is prove that people violated a specific statute. And every criminal law in our federal criminal code has different requirements. Much of the central issue in this sort of a case would involve knowledge and intent. So we'll look for both the factual pattern, did money perhaps move from Cohen onto people surrounding Trump, but also to the intent of actors involved in this. For instance, for the campaign finance violation, was there a willful and knowing violation of the acceptance of funding from foreigners in an effort to influence an election? So a lot of different pieces that'll have to be assimilated here before final decisions can be made.
And then there is Rudy Giuliani and his comments there about when the president may or may not be meeting with special counsel Mueller. And Naveed, he's saying, let's push this off until after the June 12th meeting in North Korea. Because the president intimating here that he'll have to read in. He has to get ready for this very important meeting. But what might that mean, again, that he has a couple or several weeks here to make a decision?
I think this is just an attempt to sort of manipulate the news cycle, and to do so, potentially after good news that would favor him well. To kind of go back to what Joyce is saying, I think you're right. The minutia and the specifics are yet to be known. But what we are seeing is a pattern. We're seeing a pattern from a president who refused to release his tax returns. And look, at the end of the day, what the Russians are looking for is access, and the way that they're going to do it is essentially what I see as a pattern with someone like Michael Cohen, where there's a gray area, where they would look to get access by doing something that may be somewhat legitimate and somewhat overt. And I think that without that full disclosure that would have happened prior to the election, we don't know this. So potentially Rudy Giuliani is, look, he's doing a last-ditch effort to review everything, to see if there is something that potentially in there could be this sort of smoking gun that would show that nexus between a businessman who would have had access to rich donors and potentially a Russian intelligence operation that would have used rich donors to get access to the president. So I think that, that could be a reason for the delay as well.
You've also seen here, Naveed, the reporting that Joyce and I were talking about, again, the millions that were coming into Michael Cohen, and at least through, again, that LLC. Also the reporting about those who donated to the inauguration committee, questions about were there some Russian influencers as part of that. When you look at those possibilities in that reporting, what concerns you about it?
I think the whole thing concerns me, because what Russia seeks to do, and again, having lived this, they don't approach you day one and say, we want you to spy from Mother Russia. It starts off in legitimate and overt actions. And so something as gray as lobbying, something as gray as making political donations, something which straddles the line of illegality and criminality is a perfect way to start here. And that's why we often hear the term of unwitting asset, that this may have started, a relationship may have started in sort of a legal, overt, unwitting manner. And the question is, did it turn the page? Did it become something else in which the Russians were directing, in which we would be able to show something like collusion? And I think that's what concerns me. We don't have the facts, and at the end of the day, Richard, the fact that the President of the United States has yet to release his tax returns, I think is something that should concern us quite a bit.
Joyce, 15 seconds here. We also understand lawmakers looking at a plan B to try to protect Mueller's investigation and the data he's collecting. Your thought?
Lawmakers seem to recognize that Mitch McConnell won't let a bill that overtly protects Mueller come to the floor. So what they're trying to do is come up with Plan B, and whether that's a legal protection that requires the Mueller report to be released if he's fired, that would require the preservation of evidence, or if it's a political strategy that involves lawmakers, in essence, swamping Mueller's office and standing as a protective force that draws attention in the event of a firing. It's clear that on Capitol Hill, Democrats, joined by some Republicans, are trying to decide what to do if the worst happens.
Joyce Vance.